few years ago, well, 7 to 10 years ago, I suppose, I went to Fuller's Mill, the perennial garden in Suffolk, just near Bury St Edmunds. And on the front of the house in that garden, there was this glaucous grey leaf shrub. It's got felty grey leaves, and it was covered in the most lovely mauve blossom. It's called Desmodium yananense. It's a plant that you don't see very often. Blooms in late summer, and goes right the way through the autumn. So it's a lovely plant for the wrong time of the year, if you like, because everyone expects shrubs to be in flower in the spring and early summer. But as we go on later into the year, probably there's not so many.
Hello and welcome to Talking Dirty, this time talking about all the jewels at East Ruston Old Vicarage in July 2025. Over at aforementioned garden, looking marvellous in mustard, we have Alan Edward Herbert Gray, our happy and very handsome horticulturalist.
And fresh from holidays down in the southwest of the country, we have Thordis, Sophia Maria Fredrickson. Whether I've got them in the right order, they're all there. Be grateful. That's all I'll say.
We should just go for initials or something. I should adopt a new podcasting name. It's TF. Here she is. I have worn something flowery for the occasion anyway. I've got some flowers.
Well done. I've got kind of embroidered stars or something. They could be flowers.
We'll say they're flowers. They're a starry flower. Well, he's as bestard and bejeweled as ever. And I can only imagine a lot of watering and feeding later. Your garden is looking fabulous.
Absolutely,
despite dry conditions and a lot of wind.
Well, I think what has surprised us more than anything is the fact that, in this garden, we grow masses of hydrangeas, as you know. We made a sort of kind of woodland area on the western side of the garden. And we used lots of hydrangeas over there. And once Christopher Lloyd, a great dixter in East Sussex, he started us off with the hydrangea bug because he was one of the few people that had a selection of name varieties of hydrangeas. And these were available 45 years ago. And I remember going down to Great Dixter with Graham in a big old Volvo estate that we had at the time. And you'd think, you'll never fill that. Well, we did. I have to say, and we felt very guilty and very gleeful about the prospect of having all these wonderful hydrangeas. I remember the famous white one called Madame Emile Mouillère, which was quite unusual in the fact that when we bought it, it's a white mop head, but it repeats on its new wood as well as its old wood, if you know what I mean. So you get to a continuous season of flowers, and we can have that in flowering in the garden up until December and beyond if the weather stays open. And there was another one. What was it called? It's got flowers that look a bit like a lilac. But hydrangeas, if you take hydrangeas today and you look at a selection of hydrangeas in garden centres, the breeding work that's being done is quite phenomenal because we've got, not only these strange bicolours like purple and green and, shocking pink and red and green, and white and green, of course, but we've got black stems, we've got dark leaves. There's so much going on. It's so exciting. Ayesha, that was the name of the hydrangea I was trying to think of. And I bought some in from a Dutch lorry, and one came in the block that looks as if it could possibly have Ayesha in its parentage, because the flowers, although they're much bigger than Ayesha's, they're much less like a lilac, but they do have that individual cupping of the petals, or should I say sepals, because that's very reminiscent of Ayesha, Ayshea.
Well, I'm glad we came up with the name because as soon as you say there was something special, everyone's going to want to know what it was.
Well, I suddenly thought that, yes, it's terrible, isn't it?
I know that. Obviously, perhaps with the breeding work, some of them might need less water, but I've always resisted having hydrangeas in pots on my north-facing patio because I've always sort of worried about the watering regime, despite having an Acer. But that's not mine. That came to us. That was my partner's 30th birthday present, so really got to look after that one. But I saw some beautiful white hydrangeas in pots as specimens either side of a door. Bold, because of course as soon as you have a pair, one will die. But we were having like a cream tea on our southwest adventures, and I thought, do you know what, I really think I'm going to need to find one. But then I turned to my partner thinking it would be his kind of plant and said, we should have one of those, shouldn't we? We should have that. No, apparently he didn't like it.
Oh, really? There we are.
If you were going for one, if you could only have one of the sort of whitey greeny type of hydrangea to put in a container, what would you recommend?
Well, without going into detail and knowing all the latest varieties, I think that I would choose Madame Emile Mouillère for the fact that it flowers for a very long period. And quite often the flowers will in the garden will fade to pink, which is something I don't particularly like. But in shade, and with plenty of water, they fade to a lime green, which I do like. So that's probably what I would have. But I think, I mean, and recently, of course, there was about the last four years ago or something, there was a hydrangea at the Chelsea Flower Show that won the plant of the year, and it was called Runaway Bride. And for some reason, it's always tons more expensive than any of the others. And I had a couple, and I think they got sort of slightly starved in the containers that they were growing in. And since we've repotted them, they have done their stuff. And their stuff is they make a wand, a long branch with a flower at the end, but each side shoot, and the nodes between the stems yeah, they're quite tight. So they have this great arch of flower with a flower at each node. And they have been really rather wonderful. I'm kind of super pleased with them, in actual fact.
Inspiration, maybe. I'm not really supposed to buy any plants, but maybe. Maybe that's one that I can sneak onto the patio, probably in place of something else that will have died from neglect of being away from the garden for a couple of weeks. It was quite funny before I left because Theo and I have been sowing so many seeds because, trying to get him into gardening. I suddenly thought, this is going to be terrible. What an awful experience to have sown all these seeds, come back off holiday, and they're all little shriveled, brown, crispy things in the pot. So before we went, I packed them all into my mum's boot and she drove off down the A11 with them to try and keep them alive while we were away. And I think today they may return to our garden for us to try and keep alive. So I'm hoping he
Well,
will actually care and it will have not been effort for nothing.
well, no, but he would see the difference. You see, I think that's the great excitement. I mean, I know that we have a lady called Jenny who comes and works in the garden 2 days a week. And she goes away for 3 days and then comes back and she says, "Gosh, look how things have grown." And she does seedlings and potting on and stuff like that. And she's always amazed at the amount of growth. So he will see that. Theo will see that, and he will actually like what he sees, I'm sure, because he'll see the change. He'll remember.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Well, I'll update you on that maybe next time. You are seed sowing, always seed sowing at East Ruston.
Yeah, I do tend to sow a lot of seed, but I mean, I think probably it's because I buy a lot of seed, I suppose, or I save a lot of seed. But there's a couple of seeds that I'm still sowing, and that's any of the Amaranthus family. That's Love Lies Bleeding, but there are many more. There's from 8 feet tall downwards, really. Hot Biscuits is one, and Foxtail is another. But the reason I sow them quite late is because they make wonderful gap fillers. And they also have another quality, I suppose, in that if you don't prick them out when they're ideal at the ideal time, they will sit still and they won't carry on growing. And then when you do prick them out, and what I tend to do at this time of the year, I take a little seed tray and I divide it up into clumps of 3 or 4 seedlings, trying to keep the roots as compact and undisturbed as possible, and pot them like that. And then within 2 week period, they have doubled in size, and within a 4 week period, they're big enough to go in the garden. So they're great for freshening up areas where perhaps a bit of bedding has gone over, or you've got a shrub that you've maybe has died even in the circumstances that we've had this year, which has been pretty high temperatures accompanied by quite high winds. And that zaps the moisture out of plants. But I will just say one thing that hydrangeas, they demand water. And in our woodland garden, they're on drip feed system, which just drips overnight and permeates the soil underneath them. And they get that about every 10 to 14 days, and that has kept them amazingly fresh. But they are sheltered, they are in the understory of trees, and they're in shade. So I mean, the water loss is minimized by that. But even so, it's still been pretty hot. And yeah, I'm just amazed that they all look so
Mm.
lovely.
Yeah, it was actually one of the slightly sad things about being in the southwest when it was so sunny and dry is of course a part of the world which you kind of want to see dripping with water. There's something
Yeah,
strange about walking through lichen clad mossy like trees and areas and walls and it's all looking parched. It's a
yes.
bizarre experience. I mean, it's beautiful, it's lovely to be there in the sunshine and there's all dappled light and the birds are singing, but it really felt like there was no moisture left in it.
Well, I think, yeah, and I mean, this is the kind of thing that's happening all over. We don't have mossy lichen and drippy with
Mm,
drippy this, drippy that. But we do have lovely green grass.
mm,
And this year, of course, we lost the green grass in beginning of June, really. And that's very early. It doesn't normally happen until July, the cusp of July and August, which incidentally, when we lived in London, they were the 2 weeks we spent at East Ruston. When we were living there to earn our livings, we had first last week of July, first week of August off, and we didn't ever have bad weather. We always had the most wonderful, wonderful weather. And that was when summer kind of clicked in and you got this sort of parching. Now, today, I think we're going to have to rearrange or change our planting habits a little bit. If we're able to use water for irrigation, and we have a borehole, so we are able to do that. But if you're not, we're going to have to change the way we're thinking because our climate is going to be terribly dry. And I saw a graph the other day, and the graphs has moved on. So our winters are going to be half as severe as they used to be, and our summers are going to be half as much, again, hotter than they used to
mm.
be. So we're going to have this kind of, I think the temperature has actually moved up the country or the climate has moved up the country from the very south. Um, Going back 40 years, of course, Devon and Cornwall were the places where you plant lovely half-hardy plants and get away with it.
Yeah.
Now we're doing it everywhere. And as far as Norfolk, anyway, I don't know above us how far it goes, but it's certainly happening.
And of course,
And
with your little microclimate as well, it allows you to just test and test and test those boundaries, as you already have been doing for years.
yes, I mean, there's a couple of plants actually that I'm going to try and overwinter outside, and I've tried before and haven't been successful. One is Lantana camara, which is a nuisance of a shrub in Australia. An Australian lady came to the garden with her mother, who lives in England, and she just said to her mother, "Look at that! Isn't it strange?" She said, "They've got that in a pot, and they're obviously really loving it. We hate it. It's a weed."
And it's vicious.
Yes, and it's vicious because I mean the climate is such that we always want what we can't have, and so I'm going to try and overwinter that outside, I think, and there'd be one or two other things as well.
Mm.
I mean, I put a large flowered abutilon on our front of our house probably 12 years ago, and that's still alive. And if I go back 30 years, it probably wouldn't have been. So that it's tempting to try lots of these things. And that's why if you're a decent propagator, you can try these things because you can grow your plant from seed cuttings or whichever way you do it. And then you can try them for hardiness outside. And I think the other little trick is, or no, it's not a trick, it's a bit of knowledge, is to know that terribly young plants are less likely to survive, perhaps, shrubby plants, and than something that's a few years old. So if you've got a shrubby plant, let it get that sort of cadmium layer of bark that helps protect the stems. Let it get that happening and growing, so that it's got some protection.
Mm. And this sort of climate change is always impacting your planting at East Ruston, and you're working on the Californian border at the moment and making a couple of additions possibly influenced by the graph you saw in the paper.
Yeah, but I think it was an actual fact. But I mean, I've got a couple of figs in pots, and one is particularly a nice old fig. It's came from a cutting of White Ischia, which grows on the wall at Great Dixter below the terrace. And I mean, they've been propagating it for years. And I did buy that, and I've had it in a pot, and it hasn't produced a single fig in the pot. So I mean, obviously, I have been neglecting it, something dreadful, probably because it's in the far corner of the greenhouse, as I just said, the glass house, and didn't get enough attention. But that's going. We're planting it tomorrow. In actual fact, we're clearing a couple of bays in the Californian border, and the Californian borders, it faces due south. It's very gravelly soil. It's very dry. It has no irrigation on it whatsoever. And so, for the first couple of years, probably we'll have to remember to lug watering cans up there because there's no tap near it or anything. But that's quite easy because if you're canny, you work out if your wheelbarrow is big enough, and mine is, I can get 5 cans of water, 5 2-gallon cans of water. And because they sit in this wheelbarrow, they're packed tightly together. The spillage is minimal when you're going along, trundling along up. So I just have to do that. But I mean, out thereafter, they should be able to take care of themselves, I hope.
I've been so proud of my little fig, which is always a bit neglected. It lives in a pot in the front garden, And I do, water it intermittently, but nothing gets much care in my garden anymore. But I've been
Have
trying.
you ever had a fig?
Well, so I bought it at a plant fair. Might have even been when we were doing a radio show, and I sort of nipped around the corner and got it. I can't remember. I've had it for a few years, and it has always done a couple, but because of the mild winter, it had kept all of these little embryonic figs through the winter. So I was so excited. I've been feeding it. I've been looking after it, and we set off going on a holiday with a 2-year-old and a dog, and we're going quite a long way. The car was absolutely full of stuff. We were really pleased. We managed to leave on time, and we got down the road, round the corner. We're going down the high street in the village, and I said, "Stop! I forgot to pick the figs. There are a couple of ripe figs. I haven't picked the figs. We have to go back. I cannot not pick the figs off my tree." And Peter's like, "You are joking, right? We haven't actually got to turn around and go back to the house so you can pick a fig." No, this is deadly serious. Please go back. So we had to do a U-turn, come back to the house. I hopped out, and I was delighted because I thought they were quite small figs, but in rootling about to make sure I didn't miss any, there was a whopper. It was the biggest fig I've ever had. So thank goodness we,
Well, there you
we
are.
turned round. It was worth it. Oh, and it was juicy, and no one else wanted any because it turns out Theo's gone off figs. So I got it all to myself. So there we go. It was worth turning around, and I ate it for lunch, stopped at Stratford or somewhere for a picnic, and it was like being abroad. There I was with my freshly picked fig from the tree. Normally they are piddly little things, but it's covered. I mean, it's only, I could get my arms around it almost. It's not very big at all, but it's got all these little embryonic ones on it at the moment, and I'm so excited.
But if the weather stays open, you might get another crop because, when we used to grow figs under glass, we had 2 crops a year. And because you'd have an early crop from the embryonic ones that you just talked about, they brought through the winter. They wouldn't do that outside normally because the weather's too harsh in the winter, and that causes them to drop. But if you then they, as you say, they're making another crop, and if the weather stays open and it's warm enough, which would be under glass, you'd get a second crop.
Yeah, I'm just imagining everyone thinking she really doesn't get out enough. You just like the one fig brought me, but hey, it's good to be
Oh
easily
well,
pleased in this life. But everyone
yes.
also thinking, I'm so glad I don't live with her. That's not only did she forget the fig, but she made her poor partner turn around to go and get it. But anyway, it was going to be like a 5-hour journey. You might as well add 5 minutes on to pick a fig.
Yes, why not? Well, we've been deadheading roses a lot, and I'll tell you, roses are responding very well to being given a drink. Because when you deadhead a rose, just don't start. Go back 2 or 3 leaf nodes to a nice fat bud, and then you get another shoot and you get another flower. Hopefully, that's the idea of it. And they've been responding very well. And I know this because I've been emptying the greenhouse. We have the large glass house. You know my large glass house. It has automatic opening vents, and they are in need of some tender loving care. And we've recently, at great expense, taken on a contractor who will come and look after them and maintain them on a yearly basis, annual or 6 monthly basis, whatever it is. And so I've got to get everything out of the greenhouse. So I've had to all these lovely plants that have been hanging on by a whisker because I've got too many in there really. They've had to come out and go in the ground, and I've been making a new little border outside the greenhouse. So I go past it every day when I go into the greenhouse. And I've a couple of treasures I've sort of pulled out. I pulled out a plumbago. Now it's interesting that because Ian Roof, who works in the garden here, as you know, he found a plumbago in the greenhouse, and it was way back. It was in March, in actual fact. And he said, "I'm going to put this in the garden on that new wall." And I said, "Well, it won't, Liv. You're wasting your time." Was I wrong? Yes, I was. And I found also that I had left a plumbago in the garden over the winter, and that is alive and well. So this is all, adding to this climate change, isn't it? And also a lovely plant from South Africa, Leonotis leonurus. Now, there's wonderful, you'd love it. You must know it because it has orange flowers, and you'd love that. The big one of those, which I was keeping as a stock plant to take cuttings from so that we could keep future generations coming on. Well, that's gone in the ground, and it said, "Thank you very much. It's only been in the ground 2 weeks, and already there are signs of new growth." I mean, it's also getting lots of tender loving care and water and everything else. And one thing I tell you I did realize that lots of these plants that were in the greenhouse are all in pots or containers. When we take them out of the containers, the top few inches of soil is moist, but the rest quite often is bone dry. And that's why the plants were not moving. Because what we fail to realize a lot of the time, especially when the weather is very, very hot and very warm, is the fact that a plant, to get that root ball moist all the way through, you're probably going to have to give it. I mean, in a series, 7 to 10 litre pot, you're going to have to give it at least a gallon of water at each watering. Well, if you stand and hold a hose, if you're filling up something, you fill up a 1 gallon can, if you stand and hold a hose and you count leisurely while you're filling that can, you will realize that we never ever give our plants enough water
Yeah.
from a hose. It just doesn't happen because you can't see, you can't judge the amount.
When I was on holiday, I was walking along one of these really hot days. It was probably, 11 o'clock or something. And somebody had come out to water some flowers outside a church, and they had one little watering can, and they were doing this little splash. It was really hot, this little half-assed, if we're going to be honest, splash of these poor plants.
Waste of time.
Felt like saying, you
It is
might
a
as well
waste
just
of
go
time.
in and be in the shade, mate.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
All
It's,
good
yeah.
intentions, I'm sure. But no, watering, I mean, I think that is always a thing we learn. We can think we're watering enough, but particularly with containers, you almost
Well, I
always
think,
are.
yes, in hand watering in general,
Yeah.
our large containers, which have the big brugs in them, they have 8 gallons at each watering. It's an awful lot. And we feed at every watering too, at half strength. So that's every 2 days. And they need that because they're greedy plants. And if you don't give them enough feed and you keep them going, I mean, the reason we feed at half strength is because then they have a continual supply of nutrients, not stop, start, stop, start. And so it's always there and it keeps them growing. It keeps them growing at the pace at which, well, they want to grow, I suppose, really. Yeah.
Your wonderful big greenhouse where you've been foraying into every half forgotten corner, not saying any part of your garden is forgotten, but it must have been quite exciting when you're particularly when you've got an area where you're going to plant things out, going around thinking, oh, I can pop that in there. Oh, that'll look nice.
Well, it was in actual fact. I mean, there were several sort of things. I mean, stock plants especially. I mean, a fuchsia delta Sara, which is they call it blue, but it's not blue. It's mauve and white, mauve skirts and white uppers, and that's hardy outside in the garden. But I mean, there was one of those in there which I've been keeping as a stock plant for cuttings. And that's gone out, so that will yield masses and masses of cuttings, and better probably in the garden than in a pot. In actual fact. And there's another little fuchsia which I have. It's got minuscule flowers, so it's a macrophylla, and it's got coral red blooms. And I don't know. I just call it macrophylla coral red because I don't know if it has a specific name. I can't find it anywhere. I've looked for it, but maybe somebody that's listening to this will know what it is. That'd be interesting. Um, and that's a very nice little fuchsia, and it makes masses and masses of black berries, of course, and that you can eat the fruit from fuchsias, you know. They don't taste of anything very much, but they won't poison you. But the blackbirds, are just learning now to take the fruits from the fuchsias. So they're nothing if not, well, they adapt, don't they? Like the human race, I suppose.
Yeah. I can't remember the name of that wonderful little prostrate creeping uh fuchsia, but that has procumbens, is it? Has the most amazing berries. And it's lovely little tubular flowers. But I could when I briefly had it before I killed it, I was delighted when these big old berries turned up. It was an
Yeah,
added bonus.
it's a funny little plant, isn't it? Because it's the plant most people wouldn't even see.
Yeah. I think particularly if you can put it somewhere. I had it on my patio, so you could sort of sit by it, and not that you ever sit, but concept is there that you'll
Yeah.
sit by it and look at it. There's gorgeous flowers, and if you like taking pictures of your flowers, I think particularly rewarding because you just really zoom in and look at it and appreciate there's so much going on in such a little tube.
Well, yes, I mean that I think is absolutely true. I think shrubby salvias have been marvelous this year, and they've been marvelous for the last few years. In actual fact, one thing I think we did Graham and I did pay a visit to a garden, and we did really rather think they'd used shrubby salvias, which is hot lips, of course. They made a great joke of talking about hot lips. I did rather think that the bushes have been left to grow too old and too. I mean, shrubby salvias are lovely, but they need cutting back every year, and then they get to the stage where they get to middle age, and middle age means death, really, in my eyes, because they get so they're no longer comely, and they look twiggy and rather bad. And this is what I saw in um, hot lips that I was looking at. So it is a reminder, I think, for people to actually take a few cuttings and start fresh.
Yeah.
And the difference between a plant that's got old and straggly and a new youngster coming along is immense. You get much more flower from it, and it just looks better.
So when is your ideal time to cut back one of these hot lips type salvias?
Well, I'd always wait until I see signs of new growth in the spring, and try to judge it as much as you possibly can. Err on the side of caution if necessary, because we can still have late frosts occasionally, and if you cut it back too soon, because the growth that you cut back is actually providing a little bit of shelter for the buds below it. And so you go to if you're exposing those buds too soon, and Dame Nature comes along and sprinkles Jack Frost all over the place, it's not going to do the salvias any good if you've cut them back.
Yeah.
So I'd always err on the side of caution. Possibly think about it late March onwards, I think. That's where I am in the garden here. But I mean, other people in frost-prone areas, I would say wait until probably April or something like that.
Hmm.
You know your own climate best.
Talking of plans for the future, alongside your gap filling plant sowing that you're doing at the moment, I
Yeah.
imagine you'll be moving into the sowing for next year at some point.
Well, we did have a great little success with hardy annuals, and I mean, dare I say, common things like cornflowers, and larkspur. We did a little bit of as well. What else was there? Oh, goodness me! Oh, no, yeah, not Californian poppies, um, Shirley poppies. And what we did is we sowed the seed and then we pricked them out in clumps. These are plants that actually don't like having root disturbance. So we sow them in plugs, in actual fact, so that you get, when you take the plug out, the whole root is there and it's not disturbed. And then we potted them into 1 litre pots and we left them like that over the winter. And they were packed tight together behind a glass house outside with no other protection. They had a hedge behind them and the glass house the other side. So they, were subjected to a little bit of shelter, but it's minimal shelter. And I think probably 95% of them all came through the winter looking absolutely wonderful. They were then potted on, if we couldn't plant them out straight away, they were then potted on into 3 litres. And then they were planted in the garden. And they started flowering in probably middle of April, beginning of May. And they've been flowering all summer. And they've got to the stage now where they've got to come out. So that's where my gap filling will start. So my amaranthus that I'm so pleased with. I've got some in pots all ready to go, so that the gaps don't wait to hang around too long.
Mhm.
And another one was a French marigold called Konstance, Konstance, which grows slightly taller than the squat, dumpy little things.
Mhm.
So it has a bit more personality. But Robin Lane Fox, when writing in the Financial Times, um, was writing about it and he was eulogizing about it, saying, this wonderful thing, it flowers and it looks as fresh in November as it did in May. And that is the thing about it, providing you keep it moist enough throughout these difficult times, it has such an extraordinarily long season of bloom.
Now, it is wonderful when you get something that just gives and gives and gives. I mean, you must have numerous plants. I know Jimmy Blake, in his book about Hunting Brook, he's got like a double page spread of the plants he feels give you kind of maximum bang for buck. There must be so many in your garden where you feel like they kind of give more than you'd ever expect of them.
I think there are, but there's also the converse, you see, isn't there? There's also I mean, the flash in the pan. It's like uh, a limited season. Tree peonies.
Hmm.
I mean, 2 weeks if you're lucky, and the show is over for another year. But if you've grown a tree peony, who could not be without a tree peony? Just for that pizzazz, that excitement, I mean, you watch the buds getting fatter and fatter, and then as this calyx starts to split, you get the slight show of colour. And if you go away, then you've missed it because that the next 7 to 10 days is when you just have the flowers, and they're quite fleeting, and they will be gone. But that is what makes them so exciting, I think, because they do go so quickly. But I mean, some of the other plants that I mean give so wonderfully. I mean, keep saying roses, but roses do give wonderfully from a water and a feed mid-season, and deadheading, of course. But there are lots of other plants as well that I'm quite happy this year because we have a plant on one of our walls called Erythrina crista-galli.
Mhm.
And it is a very shrubby, very prickly thing. And it has these red flowers that look a bit like a lobster claw. And I planted one outside, and I had one in the greenhouse in my nook, in my neglected corner. And I plotted the one in the greenhouse into a bigger pot, and it still hasn't flowered. But the one outside has. It came, the top growth died down to about 3 foot above the ground, I suppose. So all the soft growth died back. And I cut those out early in the year, and I saw growth shooting on the stems, and I thought, oh, this is quite interesting. I wonder if we've got any, get any flowers. It's probably going to be one of those plants that doesn't get enough oomph into it to flower, but it is flowering. And each new shoot has a terminal cluster of flowers, and like dark red and bright, very bright dark red lobster claw type flowers. So that's an excitement itself. And of course, the other thing is what they used to be called Tacoma, that wonderful vine that flowers now. There's a wonderful one in King's College Garden where we were doing a garden party a few weeks ago. And I've got three varieties of those. Put on one side, you understand, and two orange and one red one, a pale orange, a deep orange, and a red one. And they are plants that, I mean, I remember Christopher Lloyd writing about them years ago and saying the stupid thing is that in England they are very loath to flower, but if you go 20 miles across the channel into northern France, there they are flowering away like anything. And today that is true of England as well, because that they do flower so beautifully for us. But they do demand the kind of summers that we're having, a hot and dry summer. They have aerial roots. If you want to plant them against a fence or wall, they have aerial roots that cling like an ivy does. But you need to prune them back every year because they flower on their new wood, and if you don't, they'll get in a rum old mess, I'll tell you, and it will become like a jungle. So you need to prune them back every year in the spring. Is it March job is a good time to do it, and then the new shoots that form will probably be maybe 2 feet long, maybe longer, but they will all have carry terminal panicles of blossom in August, September, maybe July even outside now. Who knows? But it's lovely to have late flowering plants like that. And going back to fruit again, figs, our pomegranates are flowering their heads off this year. I don't know whether we will ever, but I suspect we might be able to say that one day we will get a pomegranate that ripens fruit that is edible. I know in the Chelsea Physic Garden, they ripen fruit in the Chelsea Physic Garden there, but the fruit so far have been really quite small. But who knows, with a little bit of tender loving care, some irrigation, they could boost up and we could have our own pomegranates.
I
It would be fun to go to a farm shop and see English pomegranates for
would.
sale, wouldn't it?
Well, if anyone can do it, Alan Gray can. Talk of King's College actually brings me quite neatly to FLOMO, which of course is that fear of missing out you get about a flower or a
Oh, yeah.
plant. And
Yeah.
I was we were both incredibly lucky to go along for what was the National Garden Scheme opening. So we took the radio show we do, the garden party, on a Sunday, 11 till 1. If you ever want to ask a question, you're welcome wherever you may be listening. But we took that along to do the questions, live from the Fellows Garden, because some of King's you can pay and go and walk along and see the meadow by the chapel, but some bits are closed because they are for people like the Fellows or the Provost. The Provost Garden is this little kind of intimate, beautiful, the backdrop of King's College is a wonderful foil for any planting, but it was just a lovely area to go and pre-record a few bits for the radio with a wonderful head gardener, the most just generous spirited, friendly, lovely, knowledgeable man, Steve Coghill. So we went along and looked, and it was quite a simple idea that I've brought with me for FLOMO today, because I'm not really allowed to look at too many plant catalogues or seed catalogues. It does still happen, but I try to restrain myself. But it was more of a planting idea, and actually it did strike me the last time I went to the Provost Garden, which was years ago, when their rope swags for the roses were new in, and seeing them with the roses now more mature and growing along them. And I know that this is an age-old idea, but it felt like something we don't do in normal gardens. You might see it at Hyde Hall, you might see it at King's College, but normal people don't go about putting up rope swags all that much, really. You go and buy your pergolas or whatever. But I just thought, what a nice thing, actually, for people who want to block, as I often find myself thinking, I don't want to see that house over there, have a nice rope necessarily put a rose across it, but it struck me as something that I'd be interested in trying at some point. I mean, obviously, loads of you will have already done this, but in my life, it's something that I FLOMO'd over.
Well, I think what's interesting is that the Rosary de la Haye in France, they have the most wonderful rambling roses, and they train them up poles, and they only ever allow each rose to have three shoots. So from the base, they have three wands, three rambles, if you like, and they wind them round the posts like this. And periodically they take an old one out and they allow a new one to come grow from the base and train in. And it's quite interesting, but the French are very strict on some of their pruning, and much more so probably than in lots of English gardens.
Certainly more
And I
so than
think,
I would ever be, because we all know
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
not that strict,
But
really.
I think that is quite interesting. A way of getting an awful lot out of your roses,
Mm.
and swags as well. You could do the same thing. You don't have to just take the stem along the swag. You could actually wind it round the rope,
Yeah.
thick piece of rope, and that would work. And I tell you what else just occurred to me when you said about blocking something out. I don't want to look at that house. I went to Oxford College, actually, not trying to outdo you in any way whatsoever, but went to the Oxford College and had a guided tour of the garden. There was Robin Lenfox, and he had a marvelous idea. I don't know which garden it was. I can't remember. There were so many, but there was a hedge around this particular garden, and the lawn in the middle was used for sunbathing. And shall we say, the powers that be decided they needed a little bit more privacy because topless ladies were being observed sunbathing there during the day. And it was on the way to where the professors parked their cars. Uh,
What
and
a
the
great
professors were having
story.
a real good old time nosing over the hedge, you see, saying, "Oh, I better go back. I've lost my keys." So what Robin decided to do was to actually plant Malus transitoria, which is a crabapple, on stalks and then train the branches horizontally like an espalier, and it works. And that's the kind of thing that I'm thinking of. What I'm trying to say is people don't need to plant a tree to block something out. You can do it in other ways,
Hmm.
which doesn't take up quite so much space. And Malus transitoria Victoria was lovely because it's got those lovely toothed leaves and cut to precision on the espaliers every year. You get lovely white blossom in the spring, and then you get lovely fruits from the crab apples.
Yeah.
So it works in two ways, plus the fact that the way Robin had trained them, he'd allowed for peeping holes between the branches so that people could still see through to what they were viewing on the lawn.
Well, I was just thinking you can't go wrong with a crab apple, but I mean, it's keeping everyone happy in that situation. Nature,
Yes,
people
it
who think
is.
they've been blocked out from the prime professors.
I have a flow mode this week, which is unusual, I suppose, because there's a salvia called Salvia darcii, which has red flowers, and there's now a variety called Darcii peach form, and I think it may have a name as well. I don't know what it is, but that apparently is much hardier than the straightforward Darcii. So maybe it's a cross with some other variety of salvia. And hopefully, I'm going to have some arriving at East Ruston in the next couple of weeks because I think somebody should be bringing me some down from their nursery because they're coming to a Hardy Plant Society plant fair.
Well, I've got to be honest with your salvia. You had me at the word peach. So I'll be watching its progress at East Ruston with great interest.
Well, if I get some, one could be coming your way as a belated birthday present. How's that? If you can't buy plants, you can receive them as gifts, I expect.
Well, that's true. No one can
Yeah.
stop me receiving them as gifts. I've got the odd bit of cutting material that gets thrust upon me. I'm like, I didn't buy it. I didn't buy it. It got given to me. I mean, what am I supposed to do? Compost it? Of course, I've got to propagate it.
Not my fault, Governor.
Oh, Alan, it has been as much fun as ever. Thank you for giving us a little look. Next time, I think we're going to get some sprigs from the garden so that we can even more feel like we're there with Alan in his glorious 32-acre garden, which, of course, is still open Wednesday to Sunday, bank holiday Mondays. People can come and enjoy it whenever they may be watching this. It's only, what, November, December, January, February, really, that they can't come.
Exactly that. Yes, March till the end of October, beginning of March to the end of October. And, people say, well, they get a season ticket and they say, well, I won't come until April because there's not much to see earlier on. But there is. I
There
mean, if
is.
you look, yeah,
You
there
don't have to look
is.
very far.
That's true.
And snowdrop days and everything else to boot. So whenever you happen to be watching this and wherever you are, plan a visit. And I'm not paid to say that. It's just, one of my favorite places in the world. So do go and enjoy it. And we will bring you all of the awe-inspiring things in August. But for the time being, thank you very much, Mr. Gray, and happy gardening.
Look forward to August. Bye bye.
And I look as great as I always do when we do this on a Tuesday because I've been to swimming and he actually put a watering can of water over my head today. So even if my hair had looked nice, it wasn't going to look nice by the time I got here.
Please, because we have and fresh from her holidays down in the southwest, we have the stunning Sophia, Thordis, Sophia, whatever your name is.
It's a great blooper. I'm looking forward to putting that one at the end.